Welcome to Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the place for everything midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
It's Kelly Bailey, your host of the Landlord Diaries, midterm enthusiast in the Austin, Texas area. And hey guys, have y'all noticed on podcasts how amazing it is when you start having hundreds or thousands of episodes and you want to get back to the specific one that's referenced in a podcast. Like, I just have to keep clicking. This is terrible. I just want to get to this one. Well, what a lot of people are doing is they add a specific key at the beginning. So Furnish Finder, we're going to start putting FF and then the episode number. So mine would be FF32. And you can start finding the episodes that we reference that way as we grow. Katie, how are you doing today, my wonderful co-host?
I am good. You guys, I have my man voice on today.
I think it's your sexy voice.
It's my sexy voice. You know, it reminds me of Phoebe Buffay when she gets sick and she changes her singing and everyone loves it. What was it? Just Joey that loves it? I don't remember. But I'm a little bit of Phoebe Buffay today, but we're hanging in there. Today we get to talk with Barry. And Barry and his wife realized they needed to downsize as they were entering their retirement era, as you will. And instead of just renting out a room or instead of just making an ADU, I say just, but they actually closed off a section of their house and made it kind of its own rental within their property, but it's completely separate. So it's really cool and they're very creative, very sharp. He actually wrote a book that's on Amazon. So I encourage everyone to take a listen. There's definitely some nuggets you can take away from today. And as a reminder, this episode and every episode is brought to you by Furnished Finder, where you can list your property for rent for $99 a year. And that gets you unlimited tenant leads, unlimited communication. Like it's you pay kind of your entrance fee and then it's go crazy, right? So here we go.
The other thing we want you to go crazy on is those reviews. We would love your 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Enjoy. Art Barry lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. As Barry and his wife Sharon looked toward retirement, they analyzed and created a midterm rental side hustle, renting a room with private entrance to traveling medical professionals. Barry refers to this as downsizing in place, which is noted in his book, The Downsize Side Hustle, available on Amazon through Kindle for only $2.99. The book documents their journey from thought to cash flow and how to properly analyze your space to determine your next move or potential side hustle. Barry, we're so happy to have you with us today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. So what made you want to become an author and just document the journey of getting started in the midterm rental process?
An interesting question. I didn't have any thoughts of writing a book until we finished doing what we were doing and looked back at all our notes and all the things that we scribbled down. And then it made me realize maybe we ought to share it because there's probably a lot of other people out there who would like to do the same thing, but maybe just don't have the know-how that they think they have. At this age, you probably have more experience than you think you have, and if you draw on it, you can actually do quite a few great things.
For sure. So remind me, Barry, is it just the one midterm rental out of your home that you have currently? And if yes, please describe it to us. And if there's more thoughts of future rentals, then let us know that as well.
Sure. One of the things that we had already in place in our home was a fourth bedroom. and it had its own adjoining bathroom, as well as having a very large square footage area. It's about 400 square feet. So that's about the size of a hotel room, if you will. So after having my father live in it for a couple of years and then turning it into storage, we thought this would be the perfect place if we could only figure out a way to give it a private entrance. And we figured out a creative way to do that, as well as get some extra power into it so that we'd be able to host the number of appliances necessary for a traveling nurse or traveling medical personnel. And that's really how it evolved. You're going to find out if you've seen pictures that I just swing the hammer and my lovely wife does the decorating and the design. So we make a good team in that respect.
I think that would bring me to the next question, because you kind of ride the line between renting a room and renting like an ADU, and it almost sounds like you've turned that extra bedroom into somewhat of an ADU, if I'm correct. So do your tenants have, do they ever have a need, or do they enter the rest of your home, or do they have their own, separate wing, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, separate wing is the perfect description because our house is built in a U shape, and this particular part of the wing is the end of one of the U's. And what what happened was is that we figured out a creative way to make a private entrance. It already had a garden entry door into a courtyard. So we put up a privacy fence of about 25 feet and then focus that on the entry gate to the street, and that gives our nurses and our medical personnel the ability to come in to a private lighted monitored entry and get into their area without having to come into our house. We also added an external mailbox, and we added plenty of external lighting. So if we have people who work days or who work nights and who come in late, it's perfectly safe. My personal criteria was if it wasn't safe enough for our daughter, it wasn't going to be safe enough for a
Right.
renter.
And then I assume that you've made like a little kitchenette in there as well, with like a mini fridge and things for that tenant to use. Is that right?
Yeah, basically this was an 80s house, and if you can you're not old enough to think back to the 80s
Oh, we're old
probably, but
enough.
they well, neither of you
Listen,
look it.
these filters do
Um
wonders.
I'm every bit of 29.
um it had two very large mirrored closet doors and a very large closet, almost 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep. And after looking at it and looking at the electrical design we had available, that was perfect to be turned into a countertop kitchenette. So we have a kitchenette that has a countertop dishwasher, if you will, a sink, um, a microwave, a full-size refrigerator, and basically all the comforts of home, but in 400 square
I'm
feet.
actually really excited we're getting into this now. Katie, you have met your perfect item. Since if you've been listening to past episodes, you know Katie does not love built-in ice makers to refrigerators. That's
I
her
hate
pet
them.
peeve.
I
You
hate
have met
them.
your match. Barry doesn't love
Yeah,
them either because
I
they
hate them.
break often. So
Yeah.
tell us about this countertop ice maker, Barry.
Well, they're inexpensive. They fit on the countertop, and if you buy them cheaply enough, like we did ours, and then add a 2 or 3 year warranty on top of it, if it breaks, they're going to replace it because it's too small to fix. Um, I come from the computer industry and I understand what's called mean time between failure or MTBF. And the MTBF on installed ice makers in refrigerators is one of the highest or one of the lowest MTBF items that you can buy in the appliance marketplace. And when they go out, they're a pain because it'll cost almost $200 in labor to replace them, plus the cost of the part, which is probably $200. That's a third of the refrigerator. So in a rental, it doesn't make any sense to have a refrigerator with a built-in ice
Mm-hmm.
maker.
Mm-hmm.
And the important part of the story is when I bought the refrigerator, besides getting a good deal on it and buying it on a no interest so I could increase my cash flow for the first year, I bought a warranty for it. It went out at 23 months. The warranty was for 24 months.
Right
Home
in
Depot
time.
replaced it.
Very well. I have had the worst luck with built-in ice makers, and I'm at the point now where I won't fix them. I'll still get appliances that have them with them, especially if they're inherited or with the property, but I won't fix them. I'll just buy this $60 countertop ice maker, and a lot of times the tenants like them better because they make smaller pieces of ice. So,
And Barry
yeah,
said
it's a hit, man.
you said it makes ice in like 6 minutes. How much ice do you get in 6 minutes?
Yeah, you get ice. You get probably 2 trays full in
What?
6 minutes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I didn't know if we were going to make it to this section now. I was actually planning to do it later, but we're already here talking about the really cool furnishings and things that Barry has done throughout his process. So we're kind of getting into great recommendations for you guys starting off. And then we're going to circle back to, whoa, why is Barry in this in the first place? And how did he decide to downsize in place, as he refers to it, versus, moving to selling his 4-bedroom, 2-bath home and moving to a smaller apartment or a condo or things of that nature. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But you said something about mailboxes, and that was a question we've had from previous episodes that a guest would like to know more about, that listens to our show. When you added an additional mailbox, how does it work for them to add their name to the to the mail? Do they have to go in every time? Do you have to go in every time? How does it work with mail?
No, there's two ways to do it. One is that you can add another mailbox and go through standing in line at the post office and filling out all the forms, or you can let your tenant have their mail delivered directly to you as John Smith, care of, in the owner's name or the leaseor's name. What we did was we just added a separate mailbox on the private entry gate. And if we receive mail, we just go put it in their mailbox and send them a text message so that they know they have mail and they can go to
Okay,
get it. And it has a little lock on it, so it's a private
nice. I
box.
like that. And then furnishings, you had many that we've talked about, but quite a few that we haven't that I wanted to highlight. And one of them was storage. When you have because y'all did the remodeling process combined with the furnishing process, you were able to make really wise decisions on, okay, when do we need to actually remodel this versus just apply it to the furnishing side. And one of the things that you said for space was, rather than spending the money to add a full-blown closet, you used a wardrobe dresser and underbed storage. So tell us about that.
Well, you'll have to check your local homeowner codes, but if you have a bedroom and you remove a closet, it's no longer a bedroom. So when you go to sell the house, if it was a 4-bedroom house, it's now a 3-bedroom house. That puts you in a different category for when you sell
Interesting.
it. However, if you add a wardrobe, at least in our locale, our city code says that any bedroom with a full-size wardrobe still counts as a bedroom. So we gave up the closet, got a wonderful kitchenette, but still have a bedroom because we added a wardrobe. And we bought a very nice bed, which is a very strong metal frame. And I do recommend metal frames. Don't use particle board frames in a rental bedroom. They break after every 2 or 3 rentals. But this metal bed is high enough that you can put large storage containers under it, but it's still not at a height, even with a very thick
Mm-hmm.
mattress, that it's uncomfortable to get in and out of. So it was perfect, and it gives a rental person renting the facility still the ability to unload their car and have plenty of place to put all their stuff.
So I'm hearing a lot of places where you were able to get creative with the design of, let's call it, your separate rental wing. But what were some of your biggest challenges and things that you guys might have had to go back to the drawing board a few different times to kind of figure out? Because it is.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept that you've done, and we don't have a lot of landlords, I think, that have done that, where we have landlords who will rent a room in their house, but you really have kind of created that ADU within your house. So tell us kind of what some of the really tricky parts were.
Well, the tricky parts are always going to be plumbing if you don't already have it, and we had it because we had a full 4-piece bathroom. The second piece is your electrical, because bedrooms almost always have just enough electricity to cover the things that a builder thinks are going to be in the bedroom. And typically that's about a 15 amp circuit, which could be multiple plugs. So we really needed another 15 amps to cover the kitchenette. And in order to make that happen, we needed to steal electricity from another circuit. And by tapping that circuit, we had the extra electricity we needed without having to bring an electrician in and spend a lot of money. And we supplemented the loss of that circuit by adding solar lights to the outside of the house. And so we ended up spending $100 to do that instead of $1,000 to bring in an electrician. The other piece that you need to worry about, especially since we've all just gone through the plague, is that you need to shut the air conditioning vents, if you have central air conditioning, off to that portion of the house. And you can do that very inexpensively with a little adapter that fits inside the vent, and then add an air conditioner heater as a window unit. One, it'll cut your overall bills. Two, if you've got medical personnel, and as we have had over the past 2 years, and 75% of them were ICU nurses who were dealing with COVID patients, we had no air exchange between our home and the rental facility. So it worked out perfectly, and it was very inexpensive. And I might add, based on the way credit is going in this country, these 24-month or 36-month no interest payment things are perfect because you can buy them. And as I say in the book, we bought what we needed and still had positive cash flow from the very first month rental.
That's great.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Do you know how much it cost you guys to change that bedroom into a unit? And then tell us about kind of your cash flow and your profit every month.
We spent roughly $5,000. Labor was ours because I swung the hammer and did all the work except for some plumbing. Our first cash flow, we started at $1,000 a month. We maintained that for the first lease and then moved to $1,200 a month because we were looking and constantly analyzing what our competition was, and no one could touch us in the area for the location and the cost. And looking at comparables, if you will, those were going to be the long-term hotels or extended stay hotels, and they were well above us. And no apartment in our own area was anywhere near us, because by the time you add utilities and the cost of the apartment, it's $2,000 a month plus the deposits. We're all in for a renter at $1,200 a month and making an incredible gross margin on that.
Awesome. I love that. And yeah, from the book, there's a lot of really good numbers. He breaks down, what the gross income was, what the net income was for the year. And your first year, you were already producing just from turning one, and if you read the book, you realize that the one bedroom that they converted was the one that was the storage bedroom. Like they were using the other 3 bedrooms for things, but this one wasn't really used for anything. It was collecting stuff. So they downsized and made it into a rental through a really amazing process that's all documented in the book. And you ended up, net income was a little over 22,000 for that first year, correct?
Yes.
I love that. Before we move on, I want to, the
Oh,
last
no, no,
3.
no. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
Let me correct you.
Yes.
22,000 for the first 2 years,
2 years.
24
Okay.
months of operations.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't want to
24 months.
mislead anyone.
That
Yeah,
makes more sense. The
Thank you.
math
I
in my head was like, hmm?
yeah,
I
yeah.
missed that in
No,
the book.
no. He's pulling something on me.
But there's actually 4 items that intrigued me, just to wrap up the furnishing conversation, that I wanted to give you some opportunity to talk about. One, the countertop dishwasher. I think that's really cool because the whole purpose of the process was you just determined how much of a budget you want to use, what appliances were worth adding, and which ones had, for space and monetary decisions, had equivalent counterparts that you could use as opposed to the normal appliances. So countertop dishwasher. I'm intrigued by the emergency power outage light, and then you have no candles or incense in the home, only battery powered candles. So those 3 things. What can you tell me about those decisions? Dishwasher, you got them.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. The first thing that we did, I do a lot of research, and one of the things that I did, bless you, one of the things that I did was do a lot of research on what's coming in appliances, and the best place to look is at Europe, because in Europe they don't have nearly the amount of space that we have in a home, and so appliances typically are smaller. Japan is the same way. So we looked at what appliances might be useful to us, in the dish top, the countertop
Hmm.
dishwasher was one of the best items, because I figure that a nurse coming in after 12 hours on her feet or his feet is not going to want to cook and then wash
Good
dishes.
point.
So a countertop dishwasher is something that would make sense.
How many plates or things can it hold?
It'll wash a full 4 pieces, and we set the space up so that if the person wants to have 4 people as guests, there's space for 4 people to
Okay,
eat.
lovely.
And in our kitchenette, you could cook a meal for four
Okay.
people. So I mean, it comes with a coffee maker. It comes with an induction hot plate. We've provided everything possible. And I would mention that if you're really smart when you set these up, you can probably get half your appliance furnishings at
Hmm.
garage
Hmm.
sales at very low cost, because people use these items and they're not very well used for the most part, and they typically work just fine for a rental.
That was a family event every week growing up. Saturdays was my parents' garage selling days, which for us kids meant a few trinkets here or there and donuts. So I love garage selling.
Yeah.
But what about the emergency power outage light and the no candles or incense?
Well, we have an issue with our insurance, that our homeowners insurance doesn't like renters in the first place, but will tolerate them as long as they're not college students. But the one thing they recommended is that, and I recommend that anyone who is going to look at doing what we did, make sure that you have looked at your homeowner's insurance and you've got the right coverage for what you're trying to do. If you don't, you'll get yourself in trouble very quickly. The other thing that we require, and I'll just throw this in, is all renters have to have their own coverage for renters insurance, so that if something happens and our insurance doesn't cover them, their renters insurance does cover them for those things. And it's very inexpensive. So what we did was we did the research and found out that little LED candles will give you the same ambiance as regular candles, and they're much safer. The emergency light is a less than $20 item at almost any hardware store, and it basically just plugs into an outlet. So if the power goes off, the light goes on, and you can remove it from the outlet and use it as a flashlight in order to get out. And we use that as part of our safety briefing for our renters. We also, because we live in Texas and we're kind of in the process of building a third world utility system, excuse me, we've added an emergency generator so that if a nurse needs to be able to get up and get dressed and get ready to go to work or come back in and cook a meal, we have the ability to move power into their
It's
space
amazing.
for the amount of time that they need it. During the great ice storm we had, our nurse, we didn't have that kind of utility value, and our nurse ended up spending time on a cot for 6 days
Mm.
in the hospital because there was no power in the city
Oh.
anywhere but the hospital.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
some of these investments you're talking about are pretty inexpensive, but I know things like generators, those can get expensive pretty quick. So tell us how essentially making, I mean, let's call it, I keep just coming up with different words for it. Let's call it a separate mother-in-law suite, right? Adding the rental unit within your house, plus adding these things like the privacy fence and the generator. How has that affected the value of your home?
It increased it quite a bit. The realtor that we trusted, who wasn't simply trying to get us to sell, um, gave us about a $25,000 bump,
That's great.
which is
That's
pretty
amazing. Yeah.
significant. Against a $450,000 estimated value house, that's still
Yeah.
14,
Well, it is.
15%.
It is. If you ever decide to sell your home, it is an attractive thing, even to use as a mother-in-law suite if someone doesn't want to use it as a rental. So I think that's important to keep in mind if you're doing something to your own house, right? Is to always think about, okay, if the day comes where I need or want to sell this, how is that going to translate, and making that something that makes sense for people, whether they want to rent or whether they don't. We live in actually a new build house, and when we were getting to choose the setups, one of the options was to make two of the bedrooms into a little mother-in-law suite where you could have one, it was still a bedroom, then you had a bathroom, and then it was like a second little living room. So in theory, you could have a family member or someone, live in that whole little zone. And that does, it adds value and expenses to a home, even as a new build. So there's definitely value there. And I think you've set that up in a very wise way that you're not kind of putting yourself in a corner when it comes time to take the next steps.
For sure.
Yeah, our our whole problem and the reason we came up with the downsize side hustle was that if I sold my house for $450,000, I couldn't replace it with something half the size for the same price. That's how upside down the market is right now and how difficult it is. The other piece of it is both our children are far away from us. And even if we decided to downsize and move to be closer to them, we would be in a terrible problem because we would be using most of our money that we would need to live on for another place to live. And the chances, because of their ages, of them moving away is still very high. They're not what I'd call sedentary yet in place, in their locales. So the risk is moving, the risk isn't staying. But the nice thing for someone who buys our home is if they buy a home, even if they buy it at this price and these mortgage rates, if they leave the rental portion in place, they're going to knock off a third or more of their mortgage payment.
Yeah.
by
Yeah,
leasing it
it's
out.
it's interesting what a market like what we're in right now is doing to not only owners and buyers but investors, because it's just kind of forcing some creativity, right? Good investors are still going to find good ways to make investments that make sense, and same things with buyers. They'll get creative and maybe they'll find a property like yours where they could rent a little bit of the property or something like that. But I think it's very easy if you're someone who has always wanted to have a property to say, okay, well, I'm going to wait until the rates come down. I'm going to wait until prices cool off, when no one has a crystal ball and no one can know what's going to happen with the market or when. So the best, your best chance for success is to get creative and to get out there and to find a way to make it work and not just wait for everything to magically fall into place.
It's exactly right. My grandfather told me when I was about 8 years old, you can live without profit, but you cannot live without cash flow. And the times we're living in right now are all about cash flow, especially for people in my age bracket.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And and if you'll let me, I'll tell you about something that we're experimenting with that you might want to pass on, and let me know when that might be appropriate in the
Go
conversation.
ahead.
I have a friend who lives a few houses down, and she's looking for her own side hustle, and she doesn't have the kind of capital that she needs to start her own business. So after thinking about it and doing some brainstorming, I told her to contact some of the retired people in our neighborhood who are still in their houses, who are in the same position we're in,
Mm-hmm.
and go in as a midterm rental consultant
Mm.
and show them how to change their property for a midterm rental, and then charge a management fee on a 1 year contract to make that happen and handle the rentals for that first year. And if they're still interested in continuing it after the first year, she'll continue to represent them as their rental agent.
Nice. That's a good idea.
It seems to be we've had 3 or 4 retired couples sit down and look at coming up with a budget to make it happen. And so they're front ending the process. She's going to be doing the sweat equity, and she has a very dependable contractor who will be doing the minimal changes that are required to make as we made them. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, this isn't going to work for every home,
Nope.
but it's going to work for a number of homes. And as she told me, she said, "What's the potential?" And I said, "Well, let me explain to you what the potential is. We have never had less than a waiting list of 4 nurses or med techs for our property for the past 2 years.
That's amazing.
So we do have good recommendations from the people who rent from us, but that also takes some work, and I can easily teach her how to make that happen. Within about 6 months, she's going to be on her own, doing it on her own, and doing something very innovative, which is what I call good commerce.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of John Lewis, the congressman, say that there's good trouble. Well, there's also good commerce, and good commerce is when you keep small amounts of money circulating a number of times at the lowest possible level in a community. That's called the velocity of money. And so money at the level that you and I are talking about in midterm rentals is high velocity money at a local level, which does nothing but benefit the economy and the people who are involved in it. It's a really good situation for what looks like an interesting storm ahead of us.
That's a great perspective that I think will encourage a lot of people. I really wanted to emphasize some of the things you were talking about in the process of choosing. Do I downsize and sell and move to somewhere else, or do I downsize in place and find these additional income streams? And the way you're doing it still keeps it as your primary home without having to change it over to an investment property. And in Texas, the taxes get crazy. So like I think all of our investments went up like 50% on the taxes last year, from last year to this year. So that affects your cash flow for sure. And you said there's a tax exemption for those over 65. You want to tell us about that?
Well, in our state, it may be the same in other states, but at 65, your taxes are frozen at what your 65th year is. So
Okay.
in our case, we're frozen at a few $1,000s, but someone who would come in and buy the house would have to pay double that in taxes because of the new value of the house and because they don't have what's called the retirement exemption.
I think that brings up a good point. That and what you said earlier about the bedroom, what qualifies as a bedroom, to remind everyone that if you're going to be making big changes to your house, or you plan on increasing the value of the house, or moving some stuff around, check with experts in your area, because as you guys are both in Texas, and both property taxes and I know bedroom requirements are completely different here in Colorado. So it's one of the joys of living in a country that we have 50 different states. So make sure you check with your local professionals, and get everything buttoned up so you don't have any surprises on the back end, because that can be a stickler if you work really hard on a project and you get to the end and you're like, oh no, I just lost a bedroom in my house. That's
Yeah,
not so
you,
great.
you,
Things like
you
that.
you have to do the research. And one of the first things you have to research is what's going on with the city council and what are they going to do about short-term rentals, and how do I make sure that I don't get midterm rentals lumped in with short-term rentals. And that requires some thinking about who you're going to approach and how you're going to approach them. And in a lot of cases, it's an education process. And without that process, people on city council are going to make statistically stupid mistakes because they'll do what they think is necessary to protect a neighborhood while they're not actually protecting the taxpayers of the neighborhood. And there's a huge difference in looking at both sides of those. You become an umpire, you got to call balls and strikes.
For sure. So, one of the things that you said in the book that I really liked is you have to decide whether to spend money to make money. And the key is to look at your return on investment from your target market. And so, how did you decide on your target market, and what did that process look like for you to make that choice to take an investment and spend some money to establish that cash flow?
Okay, well, you have to understand that we have just come off having a business for around 30 years, which, because of the
Okay.
pandemic, was going away. And I've always been someone who analyzes risk. And I look at, what's the lowest possible risk I can take based on the reward that I perceive I might get. So, if I was going to go in and spend $20,000 on a remodel job that was going to be used as a rental, but I could get away with 5,000 and some sweat equity, the difference was I was going to be able to have positive cash flow from the first month by leveraging both my equity in the house, which in my case, I don't owe any money on a mortgage, so it's all leverage for me. But it gave me the ability to look at 12 months and 24 months down the road and have positive cash flow all 24 months, provided I maintained 60% occupancy. We're at 90% occupancy.
90%. That's really good. Great
Yeah,
job there.
the numbers work, and let me compliment Furnish Finder here. It's all because that marketplace exists but that's a marketplace that is just evolving, and that's the kind of marketplace that I and anybody else who has what I call long-term meerkat vision. Have you ever seen pictures of meerkats?
Yes, but I don't remember what they
Well,
look like right
there's
now.
little ones that aren't very far above the ground, and those are the ones that are interested in bugs. And there's ones that are a little higher than that, and
Mhm.
they're interested in what's 10 or 15 feet away. And then there's the really tall meerkats, and they're the ones that are looking out in the distance watching for danger. You got to be a tall meerkat in this marketplace to survive, and you got to be adaptable. One of my favorite mottos and one of my most respected groups of people are the U.S. Marines, and their motto is adapt, improvise, overcome. I believe in
Mhm.
that. I've used that all my life, and even though I never served in the military, I know what that kind of attitude can bring you, whether you're in business or whether you're trying to manage a family. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think I love how you say that you use tools and that you've been able to use Furnish Finder. So I think as we wrap up, I'd love to know kind of any tips or tricks or ways that you have found to use the Furnish Finder marketplace that have been beneficial for you finding, great tenants and having high occupancy and having good tenant relationships, all of those things that have set you up for success.
Well, I would tell you what I grew up with in the retail business with my parents, and that is the customer is always right. Read rule number one. Rule number two is if the customer is wrong, reread rule number one. If you're doing something wrong, you want your tenants to tell you about it so you can fix it. But you also want to try to make sure that you're going to treat your tenants like you would treat a member of your own household if they were living in the same space. A lot of people don't realize that the the recommendations that you get on services like Furnish Finder, and I only use Furnish Finder, mean a lot because people do read them. And when you set up your Furnish Finder ad, be sure that you use lots of pictures and you show the convenience of what you have thought through, and that you make sure that you list all the things that you're going to provide for the money that you're going to ask them for, because $1,200 is a lot of money. Yeah, that's a nurse's stipend amount, roughly. Depends on whoever the hiring company is. But if it's a really luxury place and you want to charge $1,800, and you can probably find a nurse or two who can afford that, and you're willing to live with a 40 or 50% occupancy rate, that's great. I'd rather stay busy, have good cash flow, meet new people, and very interesting people, I might add. Our first tenants were a Muslim couple, and he was the nurse. Our next tenants were single nurses. We've had male and female. We've had people of different religions, and in a lot of cases, different socioeconomic levels. And it's all part of the learning process, and finding a good stable platform to feed you those leads so that you can use the Furnish Finder service to check them out, or use your own. And I do use my own. I don't use Furnish Finders. I have the nurse or the tenant pay for it. And the reason I do have them do that and pay for it, I want to make sure they've got some skin in the game,
Yeah.
because that's their first qualifier. If they're willing
Mm-hmm.
to pay for a credit and background
Uh-huh.
and tenancy check, that's it. That's the first thing I check
Agreed.
off
I'm
on
like,
my
yes, they're
list.
actually interested. Like once they choose to pay a little money, it's like they want to move forward, which is always a good indicator.
It's so standard too. It's so standard that any nurse or potential tenant that gets alarmed, I just try to take it as an opportunity for education that like this is, standard practice for midterm rentals, and we just want to make sure that everyone is safe and yeah.
Well, yeah. it's kind of reminiscent of what my mother told me when I was a teenager and I was just starting to get out and meet young ladies. And she said, "Just let me remind you that there is nothing more expensive than a girl that's free for dinner."
That's true. If it goes well, there's a lot more bills to
And
come. But so one thing that I thought you went about really well is so many people choose a property and they're like, okay, now what? But instead, you took all the steps to analyze, well, what does downsizing a place look like best for us? And then you looked at your market and said, okay, here's my competition around me and how I can, what budget I'm going to be able to work with based off of what I'm going to be able to charge for traveling medical professionals by looking at extended stay hotels, bed and breakfast prices, and short term rental stay prices. And then you also did the same thing with insurance. You chose your insurance first before you started the process to know what to expect on your insurance, who is going to cover you best. And it sounds like there's like a landlording insurance option that you can add on for like 200 per year in your case. Like, what is the landlording insurance?
landlord insurance basically gives you coverage so that if you make an error or an omission, it's basically landlord's E&O insurance. If you make a mistake with your property and the tenant sues you, you've got some coverage. If you're not careful with how you lay out your contract that your lease that you're going to have your tenant sign, you can get yourself in trouble. And if you're going to, pardon the expression, if you're going to go
Mm-hmm.
naked on insurance, you better have a really good lease and you better be willing to defend it. So in our case, we use the Texas Standard lease with some modifications. One of them is, we cover firearms, we cover candles and incense, we cover extra tenants. We have a lot of people who come to live with us who are married, but their spouse lives at home, but they want their spouse to be able to come visit and stay. We have others that have significant others. As long as we know about it and it's not a surprise, and we make sure that it's clearly delineated in the lease, then we're okay without that particular piece of insurance. But it always pays to be careful. But you do have to be careful because in this business you can end up insurance poor. I do recommend that you have good, solid homeowners insurance and that you require the tenant to give you a copy of their renter's insurance. That should give you all the coverage you need. The only thing that I can give you outside of that is to take out an inexpensive liability umbrella insurance coverage, which gives you an extra $1 million if someone decides to get litigious. When I was growing up, I used to spend every Saturday, at least until I was about 10 or 11, in the office of an attorney who was a friend of mine, who I like to talk history with. And I once finally asked him, I said, what's a trial all about? What's a lawsuit all about? And he said, a lawsuit is when you get all the liars in the same room.
you're, you're full of jokes today, aren't you, Barry?
Well, it wasn't a joke, and he made his living keeping people out of court by making sure that they were indemnified and they had good contracts. And I can't stress enough how important it is, especially the way things are now with the way courts work, for landlords and tenants to both protect themselves, not necessarily from each other, but just from circumstances. And there's inexpensive ways to do that. You just got to do the research.
For
I
sure.
think this is a good time to remind everyone that KeyCheck, which is Furnish Finder's sister company, and that you can get to through the process of when you sign up for your Furnish Finder listing, has state-specific leases that are consistently kept up to date. We're backed by a partner that specializes in law. So just like Barry's talking about, if you want to know that your lease is foolproof, that is a really great place to start. We also offer through KeyCheck that your tenants can get renters insurance, which is another good layer of security. And in addition, I would just personally recommend finding a really great insurance broker in your area by recommendation or referral, that can help you. I know for our rental properties, we have to have 3 different agents because we're in 3 different states. But every agent that we have has been so beyond helpful in figuring out exactly what we need for the exact type of property. Again, the state's requirements. Every state has different requirements, but making sure that it is landlord specific insurance and they know how you're going to be renting it. One of our properties, we have to be very, it matters how long we rent it, not just 30 days or more, but is it 6 months? Is it 8 months? And the rates vary a lot. So get someone who knows what they're talking about and just make sure that, you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
For sure.
I would absolutely recommend that. I came to Furnish Finders before KeyCheck, so I had to do a lot of this on my own. You're providing that service as a part of Furnish Finders, and I highly recommend that. The other thing that I would recommend doing is if you can find somebody who rents apartments or who leases apartments on a regular basis and just take them to coffee and say, what are some of the problems you've had with your tenants? That will tell you some of the things that you want to try to insulate yourself against. While I have not had any of the kinds of problems that I unearthed with the tenants we've had, the one issue we had was with pets, and we don't accept pets, but we ended up accepting one because it was an adoption situation, and we felt sorry for the pet. And it turned out not to be a bad experience, but it wasn't a great experience either. And so I would tell anybody who leases apartments or who leases space to anyone, you got to be careful about pets.
Yeah, and I think part of your choice for not allowing pets was because you foster dogs as well and have like multiple dogs in the home at one time, and then you're sharing a space with those any traveler that would be bringing a pet as well, correct?
Well, their area is separate and fenced, as is our area, so
Hmm.
pets couldn't mix and mingle. But
Okay.
what we worried about is that if there was a dog in another part of the house and our dogs barked, and it
Right, right,
interrupted our tenant's sleep,
right,
that would be an issue for us, and we wouldn't want that to happen. So
right.
it's easier to just close that off in the leasing process and say, we're sorry, but no pets. I know how lonely it is for people to be on the road like nurses are and not have anything to come home to. And I sympathize, but the circles have to overlap in one part, and
Hmm.
that's it for us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I just have one more question. Katie, do you have any final questions before I wrap us up?
I do not.
Okay, Barry, we have a lot of investor minded individuals that listen to our show that love real estate, but really any passive or alternative investment opportunities, like we're all looking for them, right? And you have a secret one that a lot of people don't know about that sounds amazing, the closed end funds, CEFs. And what I wrote from you telling me about them last time was they are not taxed, they're highly liquid, they pass upon death freely, and no in or out brokerage fees. It sounds amazing. So tell us about them.
Well, let me give you a little correction. There is
Okay.
tax involved. You're going to pay it. It just depends on where you are in your income stream as to how much tax you're going to pay, if any, because
Hmm.
dividends are taxed at a rate different than other things. And let me give you the disclaimer here. I am not a certified financial advisor. I am not an attorney. If you've got either of those kinds of problems, you've got and you're looking for those people, you've got more problems than you could possibly want. So I would recommend that if you can eliminate those, if you can eliminate those issues, you try to do so. My issue was real simple. I figured at age 72 when I started, or age 70 when I started this, I probably had another 10 years in my location doing what I'm doing. After that, it's anybody's guess as to how well I'm going to be doing or whether I'm going to be doing it at all. So what I tried to do was set my cash flow up so that what I returned from my rental property would go into closed-end funds. And closed-end funds are kind of a strange animal. They're like a mutual fund,
Mm-hmm.
but a closed-end fund is required by law to pay out 90% of its profits to its shareholders. So for every $100 of profit they make, they're going to give $90 back to all their shareholders, split up among their shareholders. Now,
Nice.
you may end up paying tax on that depending on, because as dividends, if you're taxed on dividends, you'll pay whatever the rate is. If you're below a certain income level, you may pay no tax on dividends, and so that money may just go straight into your bottom line pocket. Now, the nice thing about CEFs or closed-end funds is they're actively managed even though they're passive to you. So there are people sitting around a computer all day trying to figure out how to make money for themselves. I'm willing to give up 10% of the income that I'm not having to pay any tax on anyway in favor of people who are going to help me make money. And if you buy those and spread them out over market segments and don't get too heavy in any one, and remember the following phrase: bulls make money, bears make money, pigs get slaughtered. That's what you got to remember. So if you're starting out in this business and if you're in rentals, you can take the money you're making and go spend it on more property, which is kind of iffy right now. Or you can go for more passive income with investments like CEFs, and I'm not saying they're the only ones. It's just they're my favorite because there are ways to understand how to use those and even buy them at a discount. So instead of paying $100, you pay $80. You buy it at a 20% discount, it's going to pay you a dividend for as long as you own it. And oh, by the way, it's got a pretty good chance of appreciating that extra 20%.
Nice.
So if you combine that with things like making sure your bank accounts are set up with guaranteed death benefit and your stockholder accounts are done the same way, and even your house now in almost all states can transfer directly to a beneficiary without going through probate.
Oh, that's
Those
really handy.
those are all things that you need to think about because the more expense you cut out of the loop and the earlier you put in money, I'm on a 10-year plan. The more expense I cut out and the more money I put in the first 5 years is the more money I have at the end of that 10-year period. I'm a long neck meerkat.
We're back to those meerkats.
Yep.
Arr.
Back to the meerkats. I love it.
Well, you've given some great advice today. If you just love Barry's style and what he's talking about, then make sure and grab his book, The Downsize Side Hustle, and pass it along to others, especially those entering the retirement age that are trying to figure out what's the best option for me. The book really breaks a lot of that down for you. So thank you so much for being with us, Barry. Any last things you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, thank you very much for having me, and I hope this helps someone. And as for the book, we're not going to get rich selling the book. What we are going to
Mm-mm.
get rich by is if someone contacts us, like happened when I was growing up and ran into one of my old teachers. And I told the teacher that I remembered what she had taught me in the 8th grade, and it had helped me get a pilot's license when I was in my
Mm-hmm.
30s. Those are the
Pass it
kind,
forward.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Pass it forward, make it count, and it'll come back to you in ways that you can't possibly imagine. At $2.99, I can't imagine that anybody would buy the book and either one, not learn something from it, or use it to save themselves some money if they try this, or even better, make some money and then teach somebody else how to do it. That would
For
work
sure.
for me. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. See you next week.